March 17, 1943. The U-boat operations room in Curle, France. The chalk squeaked against the blackboard as Lieutenant Captain G.A. Hessler updated the tonnage calculations, his hand hesitating over numbers that just didn't make sense. Standing in front of Admiral Karl Dönitz and the gathered staff officers, he wrote a figure that would have been laughed off as Allied propaganda just months before. The Americans launched 17 ships yesterday, 17 in a single day. Through the smoky operations room overlooking the submarine pens of Lorya, Dönitz stared at the math of defeat spreading across the chart table. Intelligence from agents in American ports, intercepted radio messages, and stories from captured merchant sailors all pointed to the same impossible truth. The United States was building ships faster than his U-boats could sink them. Not just a little faster, way, overwhelmingly faster. The commander of Germany's submarine force, the mastermind behind the tonnage war that had pushed Britain to the brink of starvation, was watching naval warfare change right before his eyes, all because of industrial math. Between 1941 and 1945, 18 American shipyards would build 2,710 Liberty ships, an average of 3 every 2 days. What Dönitz didn't fully get yet was that this was just one part of an industrial tsunami that would produce over 5,000 vessels and completely turn the Battle of the Atlantic around. The realization hitting that operations room would hit the U-boat force like a depth charge, shattering the morale of men who'd thought they could strangle the Allied war effort with simple math, sink ships faster than they could be replaced. The idea had been straightforward when Dönitz first presented it to Hitler in 1939. His calculations said a fleet of 300 Type 7 U-boats could sink 1 million tons of ships a month, and within a year, sink enough of Britain's 3,000 merchant ships to collapse their economy. The math seemed clear. Britain needed 47 million tons of imported supplies every year to survive. To win the tonnage war, U-boats had to sink 300,000 GRT a month to outpace Britain's shipbuilding capacity. In his leather-bound war diary, Dönitz wrote with typical precision, "The shipping of the enemy powers is one great whole. It doesn't matter where a ship is sunk, eventually, it has to be replaced by a new one." This tonnage war philosophy boiled naval strategy down to simple subtraction. Enemy ships minus sinkings equals victory or defeat. By early 1942, the formula seemed to be working. During what U-boat crews called the Second Happy Time, operations off the American coast from January to August 1942, German submarines sank 609 ships totaling over 3.1 million tons. Corvette Captain Reinhard Hartigen, commanding U-123 off New York, wrote in his diary, "Too bad there aren't 10 U-boats here instead of 1. The hunting's fantastic. The Americans are so careless, they've learned nothing from 2 years of war." Lieutenant Herbert Werner, serving on U-230, remembered the addictive math of those months. "We calculated non-stop. Each ship averaged 5,000 tons. 6 ships meant 30,000 tons. Our flotilla of 12 boats, each sinking 6 ships per patrol, meant 360,000 tons. With 40 boats operating non-stop, we could win." The first hints that something extraordinary was happening in American shipyards came from unexpected places. In September 1942, survivors from the torpedoed freighter West Lashaway were picked up by U-66. During interrogation, one merchant sailor, an engine room oiler from Baltimore, casually mentioned his ship had been built in 35 days. Captain Lieutenant Friedrich Markworth, commanding U-66, noted in his diary, "The prisoner must be mistaken or lying. No nation can build a 7,000-ton vessel in 35 days. German shipyards need at least 6 months for that." But similar reports kept coming. Survivors from the Liberty ship William Clark, sunk by U-29 in November 1942, claimed their vessel was one of 60 being built at just one shipyard in Richmond, California. The captured second mate insisted he'd seen 3 ships launched in a single week. These reports were first written off as propaganda to demoralize German submariners. Corvette Captain G.A. Hessler, Dönitz's son-in-law and chief of operations, wrote in a staff assessment, "The Americans are clearly telling their merchant crews to exaggerate production figures if captured. Such construction rates are technically impossible." But the truth was more shocking than any propaganda. At Henry Kaiser's Richmond shipyards in California, revolutionary production methods were making the impossible happen. The SS Robert E. Peary was launched on November 12, 1942, just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after its keel was laid. This wasn't a stunt or a one-time trick. It was proof of an American industrial method that would change shipbuilding forever. The key innovation? Prefabrication and assembly line construction. Complete deck houses, double bottom sections, stern frames, and bow units were built separately, then put together like giant steel puzzles. Each Liberty ship needed nearly 50 miles of welding instead of traditional riveting that required skilled craftsmen. Welders could be trained in weeks, not years. Women, teenagers, and men who'd never had jobs before were operating cutting torches and welding equipment. German intelligence agents in neutral Portugal got their hands on American newspapers with photos of these shipyards. The images were studied closely at U-boat headquarters, rows of hulls as far as the camera could see, each at different stages of completion. Cranes the size of buildings moving prefabricated sections weighing hundreds of tons. The photos showed ships in every phase at once, keels being laid while others got engines, and finished vessels steaming away from the docks. Lieutenant Peter Cremer, commanding U-333, later wrote, "When we saw those photos, we knew the war was lost. They weren't building ships, they were manufacturing them like cars." By January 1943, American shipyards were producing ships at rates that exceeded German naval planners' worst nightmares. The numbers, once confirmed by multiple intelligence sources, were devastating. 96 ships launched in January 1943, 850,000 tons. 108 in February, 975,000 tons. 120 in March, 1.1 million tons. By 1944, the average time to build a Liberty ship was 42 days, but experienced yards were finishing them in less than 3 weeks while training new workers. The U.S. Maritime Commission's emergency shipbuilding program didn't just use existing shipyards, it built entirely new ones. Captain Lieutenant Wolfgang Luth, one of Germany's most successful U-boat commanders, who sank 47 ships, captured the despair in a letter to his wife that survived the war. "We're told to hit an impossible target. Yesterday, I learned the Americans built 1.1 million tons last month alone. We're not fighting a navy, we're fighting a factory." The full force of American production hit the U-boat force during the convoy battles of March 1943. Convoys HX-229 and SC-122, sailing close together, were attacked by 40 U-boats in the largest Wolfpack operation of the war. The U-boats sank 22 ships totaling 146,000 tons, a tactical victory that should have crippled Allied logistics. Dönitz personally announced the success in a special communiqué, calling it proof the U-boat was still the decisive weapon. But days later, intelligence reports arrived that chilled the operations room. The Americans had launched 38 ships that same week. The math was unavoidable. For every ship the Wolfpack sank, the Americans built 2. Corvette Captain Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock, commanding U-109, wrote in his diary after returning from the patrol, the oceans full of new ships. Where we once found half-empty convoys of rusted vessels, now we see endless lines of new ships, fresh paint, modern equipment, American flags. They're overwhelming us with sheer numbers. Even more worrying were reports of new ship types. Beyond standard Liberty ships, American yards were building faster Victory ships, T2 tankers, and specialized vessels. The variety showed not desperation, but careful planning and unlimited resources. German submariners who survived sunken U-boats and were rescued by Allied ships gave the most detailed intelligence on American production. Lieutenant zur See Hans Joachim Forster, pulled from the water after U-189 was sunk by British escorts in April 1943, spent 3 weeks on the newly launched Liberty ship James Fenimore Cooper before reaching port. In his post-war memoir, he recalled, "The ship was so new, the instruction manuals were still in plastic. The crew quarters had amenities we hadn't seen in years: hot showers, electric lights everywhere, refrigerated food storage. The engine room had more advanced equipment than our newest U-boat. This wasn't a desperate emergency vessel, it was a well-designed ship built in 5 weeks." The American crew, confident they'd win the war, talked freely about production stats. One merchant marine officer showed me a newspaper clipping about Kaiser's Richmond shipyards. The article, meant to boost American morale, had numbers that blew my mind. Between 1941 and 1945, 18 American shipyards built 2,751 Liberty ships, easily the largest class of ships ever made. In May 1943, German naval intelligence scored what they thought was a major win, getting a complete copy of the U.S. Maritime Commission's annual report through Spanish sources. The document, meant for Congress, laid out American shipbuilding achievements and projections in detail. Reading it at his headquarters, Dönitz reportedly sat in silence for an hour. The numbers were beyond comprehension. American shipyards had launched 4,915 merchant ships totaling nearly 37 million tons during the war, almost 4 times the pre-war American merchant fleet. The report projected 1944 production would beat 1943's targets. It revealed that 250,000 individual parts were prefabricated across the country in 250-ton sections, then welded together in about 70 days. One section boasted that American shipyards employed over 700,000 workers, including 200,000 women. By comparison, German shipyards employed fewer than 80,000 workers total, most of them reluctant forced laborers. Captain Eberhard Gott, Dönitz's chief of staff, did the grim math. At current production rates, even if U-boats sank every ship in a large convoy, an impossible feat, the Americans would replace all that tonnage in 11 days. Beyond just numbers, U-boat commanders were reporting technological advantages in American shipping that made their jobs even harder. New Liberty ships had advanced navigation equipment, better damage control systems, and defensive weapons that were better than many destroyer escorts from just 2 years earlier. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Schulze, commanding U-437, noted after a failed attack in June 1943, the target ship made evasive moves that suggested it detected our periscope with radar. This new Liberty ship was faster than our intelligence said. Its defensive weapons included radar-guided guns that almost hit us when we made an emergency dive. The technology gap extended to construction methods too. While German shipyards still relied heavily on riveting, American yards had perfected welding, not just speeding up construction, but making stronger hulls. Welding saved steel, cut construction time by 30%, and could be done by workers trained in just 2 weeks. German attempts to speed up their own shipbuilding failed catastrophically. The few cargo vessels Germany built took an average of 8 months to complete. When pressure was applied to build faster, quality suffered so much that several ships literally broke apart during trials. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was devastating. Men who'd sailed in 1940 and 1941, when a single submarine could sink entire convoys, now faced overwhelming opposition. They'd gone from hunters to the hunted. Machinist Johann Muller, a diesel mechanic on U-758, kept an illegal diary that survived the war. His July 1943 entry reads, "The old hands talk about when we were winning, when ships burned from one horizon to the other. Now we're lucky to survive each patrol. We hear the Americans build ships faster than we can reload our torpedo tubes. What's the point of our sacrifice?" The stats backed up that despair. After December 1941, when the U.S. joined the war, the tonnage target effectively doubled to 700,000 GRT per month. That target was hit only once, November 1942. After May 1943, average sinkings dropped to less than a tenth of that. The hunters had become the hunted, and the math of the tonnage war had reversed completely. U-boat morale, already strained by mounting losses, cracked under the weight of these revelations. Crew members started calling their submarines iron coffins, a term that would have gotten them in serious trouble a year earlier, but was now so common officers ignored it. Faced with irrefutable proof of American production supremacy, Dönitz tried desperate measures to keep the tonnage war going. In a meeting with Hitler on May 31, 1943, he argued for increased U-boat production, asking for at least 40 new submarines per month. Hitler, increasingly out of touch with reality, approved the request but gave no extra resources. Dönitz also ordered tactical changes. U-boats were told to prioritize loaded ships over empty ones, tankers over dry cargo vessels, and newer ships that would be harder to replace. But these tweaks meant nothing against the flood of American production. In his June 1943 diary entry, Dönitz wrote with uncharacteristic emotion, "The enemy's production figures are confirmed by multiple sources. We're not facing a fleet, we're facing an industry. Each patrol costs us submarines we can't replace, while the enemy launches multiple ships every day. The tonnage war's math has become our death sentence." At the heart of America's shipbuilding success was Henry J. Kaiser, an industrialist who'd never built a ship before 1940. His methods, refined from projects like the Hoover Dam, revolutionized shipbuilding forever. German intelligence collected extensive files on Kaiser, trying to figure out how one man's techniques could tip the Battle of the Atlantic. Kaiser's innovations were simple but revolutionary: modular construction, assembly lines, women workers, and 24/7 three-shift operations that turned shipyards into factories. German naval architects studying captured documents were stunned by Kaiser's production numbers. His Richmond shipyards alone employed 90,000 workers at peak production. Prefabrication meant that while one ship was being assembled, parts for 5 others were under construction. The yard ran like an automobile factory, with ships moving through assembly stations. Rear Admiral Werner Fuchs, head of German naval construction, reported to Dönitz, "Kaiser has industrialized shipbuilding in ways we never imagined. Our yards are craft workshops, theirs are factories. We build ships, they manufacture them. It's not a difference in degree, it's a difference in kind." The Liberty ship itself became a symbol of American industrial power that haunted U-boat crews. Based on a simple 1879 British design, these ships were deliberately basic, slow, unglamorous, but able to carry 10,000 tons of cargo. A single Liberty ship could hold 2,840 jeeps, 440 light tanks, 260 medium tanks, or 230 million rounds of rifle ammunition. What terrified German naval planners wasn't the Liberty ship's sophistication, it was their sheer numbers and how easy they were to replace. When U-515, under Werner Henke, sank the Liberty ship Thomas McKean in June 1942, American shipyards launched 3 identical vessels that same week. The individual ship meant nothing. The production system meant everything. Captured German naval officers were often shown American propaganda films about Liberty ship construction. One film, which showed a ship being assembled in time-lapse, left a group of veteran U-boat officers speechless. Captain Lieutenant Hans Jenisch later recalled, "We watched them build an entire ship in what seemed like minutes. The film was propaganda, yes, but the ships were real. We saw them every day through our periscopes. New paint, new flags, heading for Britain." American mass production brought advantages beyond just numbers. Standardization meant repair parts worked on hundreds of vessels. A damaged Liberty ship could be fixed in any Allied port with standard components. German vessels, often custom-built or modified, needed specific parts that could take months to make. The production system also allowed for rapid technological upgrades. When U-boats started having success with acoustic torpedoes in late 1943, the Americans retrofitted hundreds of Liberty ships with noise-making devices in weeks. German attempts to counter Allied radar took years to roll out across their smaller U-boat fleet. Lieutenant Zur See Heinz Schaefer, who later commanded U-977 on its famous surrender voyage to Argentina, observed, "The Americans learned from every sinking and made changes across hundreds of ships at once. We learned too, but our lessons were applied to individual boats slowly and painfully. They were fighting an industrial war, we were fighting a craft war." By autumn 1943, the math of defeat was undeniable. Intelligence confirmed American shipyards were producing over 1.5 million tons per month. The U.S. and Canada started building ships faster than they could be sunk in September 1942. 713,240 tons of new shipping delivered, while 500,881 tons were lost. The gap only grew wider. At a meeting of U-boat flotilla commanders in October 1943, Dönitz wrote 3 columns on a blackboard. Ships sunk in October 1943, 29 vessels, 156,000 tons. Ships built in October 1943, 140 vessels, 1.2 million tons. Net enemy gain, 111 vessels, 1,044,000 tons. The room went silent. Finally, corvette Captain Werner Winter, commander of the First Flotilla, spoke, "Admiral, at these rates, even if we sink nothing, the enemy grows stronger. We're not slowing their growth, we're just giving their shipyards practice." Dönitz's response, recorded by his aide, was telling, "Gentlemen, we continue not because we can win the tonnage war, but because duty demands it. Every ship we sink, no matter how briefly, delays supplies to our enemies. We've lost the math, but not our honor." For ordinary U-boat crew members, the realization of American production capacity came through small, accumulated observations, not stats. Bosun Wilhelm Hoffmann, a torpedo mechanic on U-604, kept a secret diary that captured this gradual understanding. March 1942, sank an old Greek steamer. A rust bucket held together by paint. These are the ships starving England. September 1942, new American freighter in the convoy. Fresh paint, modern lines. Where did this come from? March 1943, every ship in the convoy looks new, identical profiles, like they're stamping them from molds. July 1943, The chief bosun says Americans build 3 ships for every one we sink. If that's true, why do we sail? October 1943 saw 17 ships in a convoy, all American flags, all new. We managed to damage one. What's the point? German efforts to understand and counter American shipbuilding led to an intense intelligence operation. Agents in neutral countries bought American newspapers and magazines. Technical journals were smuggled through Spain and Sweden. Every captured merchant sailor was thoroughly questioned about shipyard locations, construction methods, and production rates. The intelligence painted a more and more daunting picture. Beyond Liberty ships, Americans were building Victory ships, faster and more sophisticated, T2 tankers, capable of carrying 141,000 barrels of oil, and C1, C2, and C3 cargo vessels, specialized for specific routes. Plus hundreds of escort carriers and destroyer escorts. Naval Intelligence Officer Hermann Ernst Klee compiled a comprehensive report in December 1943 that concluded, American shipbuilding capacity exceeds our entire pre-war estimate of their total industrial potential. They're building more ships every year than existed in the entire world's merchant fleet before the war. After Germany's surrender in 1945, captured U-boat commanders testified extensively about recognizing American industrial supremacy. Their accounts, preserved in Allied interrogation records, show a psychological journey from confidence to doubt to despair. Captain Fritz Julius Lemp, who commanded U-30 at the start of the war, stated in 1946, "In 1940, we believed 20 U-boats could strangle Britain. By 1943, we had 200 operational boats and were losing the Atlantic. The Americans didn't defeat our submarines. They buried them under an avalanche of steel." Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Müller-Edzards, captured when U-590 was sunk in July 1943, was more specific. "I went to a briefing where we were shown American production figures. The staff officer presenting them actually apologized, saying he knew they seemed impossible, but they were confirmed by multiple sources. I thought of those numbers every time I raised my periscope and saw another convoy of new ships." The final stats of the tonnage war revealed the full extent of Germany's defeat. By war's end, U-boats had sunk 6,000 ships totaling 21 million GRT. But the Allies had built over 38 million tons of new shipping. The net gain of 17 million tons meant the Allies ended the war with a larger merchant fleet than they started with. For Dönitz and his staff, these numbers weren't just a military defeat, they were a conceptual failure. The tonnage war theory had assumed finite resources and limited production capacity. It never accounted for an enemy that could turn its entire industrial base into a shipbuilding machine. In his final war diary entry before Germany's surrender, Dönitz wrote, "We fought the last war with weapons designed for the previous one. The Americans fought with factories. In the end, their Liberty ships proved mightier than our U-boats, not because they were better ships, but because there were always more of them. We sank ships. They built fleets." In August 1945, while imprisoned at Mondorf-les-Bains, Dönitz had extensive conversations with other captured German leaders. In a recorded talk with Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, Dönitz made a remarkable admission: "I knew by spring 1943 the tonnage war was lost. The Americans were building about 140 ships a month, while we were sinking fewer than 40. Simple math showed we were losing 3-1, and the ratio was getting worse. I asked my staff how long it would take Germany to build 2,700 cargo ships. The answer was 150 years at our maximum production rate. The Americans did it in 4 years, while also building the world's largest navy and air force." When Keitel asked why he kept sending U-boats on suicidal missions, Dönitz replied, "What else could we do? Admit our entire naval strategy was a fantasy? Admit we challenged an industrial giant with naval guerrilla warfare?" We continued because stopping would have meant acknowledging we never had a chance. Ironically, American shipbuilders were often unaware of their psychological impact on the U-boat force. Workers at Kaiser shipyards, interviewed after the war, were surprised their efforts had demoralized the enemy so much. Margaret Rosie Thompson, a welder at Richmond Shipyard No. 2, recalled, "We were just doing our jobs, trying to beat the other shift's production record. We'd paint slogans on the hulls like 'Built by America's Women,' or 'From Richmond to Hitler with Love.' We had no idea U-boat commanders were reading those slogans through their periscopes and losing hope." Henry Kaiser himself admitted in a 1946 interview, "I was thinking about efficiency, cost per ton, worker safety. I didn't realize until after the war that we'd essentially automated victory. The Germans could never match our industrial math. Every Liberty ship was proof that democracy and free enterprise could outproduce tyranny." The numbers tell the brutal final story. German U-boat force, 1,162 U-boats commissioned, 777 lost, 30,000 submariners killed, 75% casualty rate, 2,779 Allied ships sunk. American shipbuilding, 2,710 Liberty ships, 534 Victory ships, 500 plus other cargo vessels, total over 5,000 ships. At peak production, American shipyards made the entire pre-war commercial shipping tonnage in just 3 years. The math Dönitz had calculated so carefully in 1939 wasn't just defeated, it was obliterated. Post-war interviews with surviving U-boat commanders show how deeply recognizing American industrial capacity affected them. Many admitted that by mid-1943, they knew the war was lost not because of military defeats, but because of production stats. Corvette Captain Adalbert Schnee, one of the most decorated U-boat commanders, said at a 1975 veterans reunion, "We were magnificent warriors, defeated by accountants and factory workers. Every torpedo we fired cost the Reich the equivalent of 5 houses. Every Liberty ship the Americans built cost less than our torpedoes. We fought the wrong war with the wrong weapons against the wrong enemy."
The psychological impact lasted beyond the war.
Many veterans struggled to comprehend how completely they'd misunderstood American capabilities. Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock, the highly decorated commander of U-96, immortalized in Das Boot, later worked in merchant shipping and saw Liberty ships still operating efficiently in the 1960s. He observed, "We were told these ships were emergency junk, barely seaworthy, but they outlasted our finest U-boats by decades. It was the final insult. Their throwaway ships were better than our best submarines." In February 1943, a remarkable document circulated among U-boat flotilla commanders. Written by an anonymous staff officer, later identified as Corvette Captain Hans Rudolf Rosing, it presented a mathematical analysis that proved prophetic. Current American production, 1 million tons monthly and increasing. Current sinking rate, 400,000 tons monthly and decreasing. Net Allied gain, 600,000 tons monthly. At these rates, by December 1943, the Allies would have replaced all losses since 1939. By December 1944, their merchant fleet would exceed pre-war tonnage by 100%. By December 1945, they'd have twice the world's 1939 merchant capacity. Conclusion: the tonnage war is not being lost, it is already lost. Mathematics do not lie. Dönitz's headquarters suppressed the document, but copies survived. Every prediction was conservative. The Allies exceeded all of them. Captain Lieutenant Peter Cremer, nicknamed Ollie, commander of U-333, summed up the U-boat force's recognition of American industrial might best in his post-war memoir. We'd been told America was a mongrel nation of jazz musicians and Hollywood cowboys, incapable of serious warfare. Then we learned they were building ships faster than we could count them, let alone sink them. Each Liberty ship was a 7,000-ton testimony to our leaders' delusions.
Il remembait the exact moment I knew we'd lost.
It was March 1943.
Idée juste 5 à Freter. À clean kill, when my watch officer calme tous périscope.
On the horizon, he spotted another convoy. 40 ships, all new, all American-built, all heading for Britain. I had 2 torpedoes left. 2 torpedoes against 40 ships. That was the math of our defeat. We were U-boat men, elite warriors of the sea. We thought courage and skill would triumph over numbers, but you can't torpedo a production statistic. You can't sink an assembly line with valor. The Americans had weaponized their entire industrial base, and we were hunting their output with submarines. It was like attacking a thunderstorm with a sword, heroic maybe, but ultimately useless. At the Nuremberg trials, Dönitz was questioned extensively about continuing the U-boat war despite knowing about American production supremacy. His answer, recorded in the trial transcripts, remains one of the war's most revealing admissions. By early 1943, I knew from intelligence reports the Americans were building about 140 ships monthly while we were sinking fewer than 40. Simple arithmetic showed we were losing the tonnage war 3-1, and the ratio was getting worse. But what alternative did we have? Surrender the Atlantic without a fight? Let the Allies build their invasion fleets unopposed? We continued not because we could win, but because we could force the enemy to spend resources on convoy protection, building more ships, and maintaining a vast anti-submarine network. The tragedy wasn't that we lost the tonnage war. That was inevitable once America entered the conflict. The tragedy was that we ever thought we could win it. We challenged the world's greatest industrial power to a production contest. The result was preordained. By war's end, the stats were so overwhelming that many U-boat veterans initially refused to believe them. At a POW camp in Louisiana, captured U-boat officers were shown a film about American shipbuilding. The film claimed that at peak production, the American shipbuilding machine could produce the entire pre-war commercial shipping tonnage in just 3 years. Captain Lieutenant Johann Moore stood up and shouted, "Propaganda!
Impossible.
A lie." The American camp commander responded by arranging a tour of the Houston Ship Channel. The German officers watched dozens of Liberty ships under construction, thousands of workers welding and assembling, and finished vessels sliding down the ways every day. Moore later wrote, "We stood there, 30 U-boat officers, watching them build more tonnage in a morning than our best patrol had ever sunk." Some men cried, others laughed, a bitter laugh from men who finally get a terrible joke. We'd been trying to drain the ocean while the Americans were refilling it with a fire hose. The story of German U-boat commanders recognizing American shipbuilding supremacy is more than a tale of industrial triumph. It's the moment modern warfare shifted from tactical skill to production capacity, from individual heroism to systemic output. Captain Reinhard Surin, who commanded U-564 with distinction, gave the most prescient analysis in a 1960 interview. "We learned too late that in modern war, courage and skill matter less than conveyor belts and welding torches. The Americans didn't defeat our U-boats with better ships or tactics. They defeated us with better math. They understood war had become an equation, and they simply produced more solutions than we could generate problems." The psychological journey of U-boat commanders, from confidence to disbelief to despair, mirrors Germany's broader military experience. They'd prepared for tactical warfare but encountered industrial warfare. They trained to fight ships but found themselves fighting factories. Decades after the war, German naval officers still struggled to grasp the scale of American industrial achievement. At a 1985 U-boat veterans reunion in Kiel, keynote speaker former corvette Captain Eric Topp addressed the survivors. "Gentlemen, we were the finest submarine force ever assembled. Our training was superb, our boats excellent, our tactics revolutionary. We sank millions of tons of shipping and came close to starving Britain. But we were defeated by something we never understood and could never counter: America's ability to turn its entire nation into a weapon. Every American housewife who bought war bonds, every teenager who worked a shipyard shift, every farmer who fed industrial workers, they were all weapons in a war we didn't know how to fight. We sank their ships, they built more. We sank those, they built even more. It wasn't a battle, it was an avalanche. Let's honor our fallen comrades not by pretending we could have won, but by admitting the truth. We were warriors from an old world, fighting an enemy who'd invented a new one. They didn't defeat us with better submarines or seamanship. They defeated us with Liberty ships, ugly, slow, mass-produced symbols of a democracy that could turn its entire society into an arsenal. That's the lesson we must pass on. In modern war, the factory floor is as important as the battlefield. The production line as crucial as the front line. We learned this through our periscopes, watching endless convoys of new American ships sailing toward horizons we could no longer reach. The war's end brought final tallies that confirmed what U-boat commanders had realized by 1943. After the U.S. entered the war, Germany needed to sink 700,000 tons monthly to win the tonnage war, but only hit that target once, in November 1942. By contrast, American shipyards were producing over 1.5 million tons monthly by 1943. The human cost of this mathematical defeat was staggering. Of 40,000 men who served in U-boats, 30,000 died, a 75% casualty rate, the highest of any service branch in any nation during World War II. They'd fought brilliantly for a strategy that math had doomed from the start. Admiral Karl Dönitz, writing in his memoirs years later, provided the epitaph for the tonnage war. "We calculated that sinking enough tonnage monthly would defeat Britain. We didn't calculate that America could build 2 million tons monthly." That wasn't a miscalculation, it was a failure of imagination. We couldn't imagine such industrial power because we'd never seen it. By the time we saw it through our periscopes and intelligence reports, it was too late. The war was over. We just kept fighting for 2 more years before admitting it. Today, only 2 Liberty ships remain operational out of the 2,710 built, the SS John W. Brown and the SS Jeremiah O'Brien, both preserved as memorials. They stand not as monuments to naval architecture, but to industrial achievement, reminders of when America became what President Franklin Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy. For the German U-boat force, these ships represent something else, the physical proof of mathematical defeat. Every rivet, every weld, every ton of cargo capacity was a number in an equation they could never balance. They'd gone to war believing in German engineering superiority, training excellence, and inevitable victory. Instead, they discovered that wars could be won in shipyards, that victory could be welded together by workers who'd never seen the ocean. The story of U-boat commanders realizing America built ships faster than they could sink them is ultimately about the transformation of warfare itself. It marks the moment industrial capacity became more important than military skill, production lines more decisive than front lines, and the ability to build more powerful than the ability to destroy. In the end, the German U-boat force wasn't defeated by superior Allied naval forces, better tactics, or braver sailors. They were defeated by 2,710 Liberty ships built between 1941 and 1945, each a 7,000-ton proof that in modern warfare, math matters more than martial prowess. The nation that can build the most, the fastest, will ultimately prevail. The U-boat commanders who survived carried this knowledge for the rest of their lives. The terrible understanding that they'd been magnificent warriors in the wrong kind of war, fighting with submarines against spreadsheets, attacking with torpedoes an enemy armed with assembly lines. They'd sought to win a tonnage war and discovered too late that their enemy had redefined what tonnage meant. Their story is a warning and a lesson. In the age of industrial warfare, courage and skill matter, but they're no match for overwhelming productive capacity. The U-boats of the Kriegsmarine were among the finest weapons ever created, manned by some of history's bravest and most skilled warriors. But they were ultimately defeated by something as ordinary as production statistics, as unglamorous as welding torches, as simple as the ability to build ships faster than they could be sunk. That's the final lesson of the tonnage war. In modern conflict, victory belongs not to the brave, but to the productive, not to the skilled, but to the systematic, not to those who can destroy, but to those who can build. The German U-boat commanders learned this lesson through their periscopes, watching endless streams of new American ships sail by, each one a mathematical proof of their inevitable defeat.